you're going to need something to help you process and share how vast and difficult and beautiful and amazing the human experience is. And creativity is really great for that. But once that gets combined with making a living from that creativity, you're also still going to need something that helps you bear with the human experience. And it may not be able to be the exact same activity anymore. And that's okay, as long as you give yourself some space to explore what that could be for you.
As designers and creatives, we often find our work to be meaningful and fulfilling. But creativity can also come at a price. There can be a danger of burning out when we pursue creativity with passion, and our guest today, Tasha Golden, has experienced this herself. She lost her music career as a touring songwriter due to severe burnout and depression, and now researches well-being, how it's affected by creativity, and how to use this knowledge to drive real change.
We spoke with Tasha about her work on Project Uncaged. It's a trauma-informed creative writing program for incarcerated girls, as well as the Arts on Prescription program, a model of care that's gaining traction in the U.S., in which health and social care providers can refer patients to community arts, culture, and nature experiences to support their health.
We also discussed how creatives can better support mental health for themselves and for others. This is Design Better, where we explore creativity at the intersection of design and technology. I'm Eli Woolery.
And I'm Aaron Walter. This is a free Design Better episode. You can get 2 additional ad-free episodes a month for a total of 4 per month, and get access to our monthly AMAs with big names in design and tech, just by becoming a paid subscriber on Substack. It's also the best way to support the work that we're doing here on Design Better. Visit designbetterpodcast.com/subscribe to learn more. We'll return to the conversation after this quick break.
This episode is brought to you by Sax.com. At Sax.com, it's easy to find your new vibe. Dive into the Western trend with gold cowboy boots from Stott, or go full 90s throwback with platforms from Prada. You can shop for everything on your agenda, whether it's a breezy Zimmermann dress for a garden party or a bright Chloe blazer for brunch. Find inspiration for your new vibe every day at Sax.com.
Look, Bumble knows you're exhausted by dating. All the must not take yourself too seriously and 6'1" since that matters. And what do I even say other than hey? Well, that's why they're introducing an all-new Bumble with exciting features to make compatibility easier, starting the chat better, and dating safer. They've changed, so you don't have to. Download the new Bumble now.
And now, back to the show. Tasha Golden, welcome to Design Better.
Thank you so much for having me.
We're excited to talk to you because, as you know, our audience, it's a lot of creative people, and you're focused on the intersection of creativity and well-being, specifically mental health. I'm curious how you found yourself doing this type of research and support with different organizations.
Well, yeah, this was not the plan. This was not the original plan. So I did not think that I would wind up here doing this kind of work. But the work that I wanted to do since I was a little girl was to be a singer-songwriter, travel the world and play my songs for audiences. And I got to do that for a lot of years, started touring right out of undergrad. And things were going really well, you know, all the things that I had kind of dreamt of being able to do, like having songs in TV or film and being able to work with really incredible musicians. But in the middle of that, a couple things were going on that I had not foreseen. The first of them, probably the most transformative of them, is that I had songs that were about things like my own history of depression or my family's history of domestic violence, just difficult experiences in general. And no matter where we went in the world, those were always the songs that people lined up after concerts wanting to talk about. And they would often share their own stories with me about their own difficult histories, often related to abuse or mental illness, suicide ideation. And many of them would say that I'm the first person they had ever told. And that just happened so frequently all around the world that I started to really think through, like, if I'm the first person they've ever told, that means they've never told a doctor or a therapist. not even a spouse or partner. It means that all of the community resources that are designed to meet the needs of folks like survivors or folks that are facing mental health challenges aren't reaching these people, right? Because these people had never shared this experience with anybody before they shared it with me, like a relative stranger in the back of a music venue somewhere. And that issue started haunting me because it became a kind of issue of what do we not know about our communities? Who are we not serving? Who are we not reaching? So I kind of lived with that question. And then simultaneously, just the grind of the music industry, my own history and sort of like a propensity toward depression, I just wound up running myself into the ground and eventually hit a kind of catastrophic level of burnout where I couldn't get out of bed for weeks, let alone play concerts. And I can remember like being in bed and feeling like I was watching everything that I had dreamt of sort of drain out of me, like my whole imagined future was like just disappearing. Because I knew that I could not go back to touring. I could not go back to the life that I had had, which was the only life I imagined. And so I was kind of like in this position of having to reimagine not only what I was doing, but like who I was. This was my whole identity, being an artist, the job that I had, and what I wanted to do next. And the only thing that I could come back to in those moments, besides a little bit of poetry, and depression, like nothing interests you, right? That's the main kind of thing, is like you're just numbed out. So I had poetry that I was coming back to, and I had that question that I was coming back to of why is it that people could disclose such difficult things on the context of art and music that they had never shared otherwise? Why could I do that? Why was it helping me to share things that I didn't share with anybody otherwise? And what did that mean for the rest of our lives and the rest of our sectors and services, these places that don't include music or the arts? What are they missing? And how can we bridge the gap between what's possible through the arts and creativity and what's not yet possible in all these other spaces? And I kind of pulled the thread on that question, founded a program for incarcerated girls based in creative writing and trauma-informed practice, and wound up with a PhD eventually in public health sciences, really focusing on what is it that creativity does for us and how can we translate that, not just in therapy, not just in the arts sector, but how do we translate that and infuse that into every other area of our lives?
Tasha, you mentioned the burnout, and I think many of us who are creative folks have a propensity to embrace creativity with a kind of passion that may put us in danger of that sort of burnout, and we don't always talk about that. What was that like for you, and what are you seeing in your own work around that potential downfall when you really pursue your creativity so passionately?
I think what we don't often account for is the difference between doing something because it provides a coping skill for us and doing that same thing in order to make money from it. And it is a totally fair and intuitive and understandable, at least for me, I'm a little bit biased, but it's totally understandable that we would have something that we're drawn to, that we love very much, that helps us cope with the human experience and share the human experience, that would be drawn to that and be like, oh, there are ways that I can monetize this. There are ways that I can make a living from this. Why would I want to do something else if I can spend my life really digging into this? But we have increasing studies looking at, for example, just in the music industry alone, like over 70% of people who identify as being in the music industry in one way or another also report having a mental illness. And that is way beyond the general public. And some researchers have been looking into that and found, not surprising to anybody listening, but it's not the music, of course, that makes people more prone to having a mental illness. It's the business specific side of it. It's the terrible working conditions. It's the isolation and disconnection from people that you love. For example, if you're like traveling a lot, it's the kind of perpetual grind of the work, having to hustle and show up a certain way, the image of it. And of course, like the kind of perfectionism that most of us have as far as like just wanting to achieve and achieve and achieve, that ambition that's combined with a kind of relentless perfectionism that you place on ourselves as an expectation. And so oftentimes when I'm working with clients now and with organizations and with people who are in the creative industries, a lot of times what I'm recommending is that we think about the difference between the thing that we do because it helps us to share and cope with and process and celebrate the human experience and that business aspect. And a lot of times recognizing that if the thing that you used to go to, like for me was songwriting, if that is what used to help me understand my life. Once I have turned that into a career, then every time I'm writing a song, it's always kind of like a mixed experience at that point. It's not just me trying to express my life, but every line that I'm writing, I'm also in some part of my brain thinking about, is this going to connect with the audience? How is this going to sell? Like, what is this going to feel like when I'm sharing it from the stage? And so there's a kind of like tainted experience there. And that's not bad or good. That's just maybe inevitable. But it does tell you that you need something in its place to be that thing that you go to in order to help you cope and bear with the human experience. That there has to be, if it used to be songwriting, and now songwriting is also what you make your living from, maybe we can think about something else creative that has no connection to business or industry anymore. And maybe that's the thing that we can also add into our lives. Maybe it's taking a walk, maybe it's, knitting or painting, something really different from what you do for a living that can become, I guess the message of it is that you're going to need something to help you process and share how vast and difficult and beautiful and amazing the human experience is. And creativity is really great for that. But once that gets combined with making a living from that creativity, you're also still going to need something that helps you bear with the human experience. And it may not be able to be the exact same activity anymore. And that's okay, as long as you give yourself some space to explore what that could be for you,
Tasha, a lot of our listeners do creative things professionally. And so the creative work they're doing is for somebody else, which is very different than being a songwriter where you are making a song for yourself and then you're selling it to the world. It's kind of the opposite end. And I think both ends have inherent danger because we're so emotionally and personally connected to the work. Or in the case of if you're making the work for somebody else from the beginning, you started emotionally connected to it. That's how you got into the profession. And then you crossed over to this professional line and you lose a little bit of the magic. I'm curious, like, how can creative exploration, whether you're coming at it from one angle or the other, how can it recenter us and help us reconnect with our spirit, with the better part of who we are, our childhood, the things that we love the best about who we are?
Well, what I love about creative people in general, and maybe even designers specifically, like what's great about designers is that they are often used to noticing things that nobody else notices.
Oh, it's the worst. Can't stop.
Yes. There's sort of like the person who like just picks up a pen and he's like, I guess like this is the pen that I use. And like the person who designs pens who is like seeing all of the decisions and the intricate pieces that went into making a pen show up the way that it's showing up in your life, right? And that can be exactly like you're saying, this could like drive you absolutely bananas. But I think what's beautiful about that, and what I think about all the time as a public health scientist who's also thinking about the role of creativity, so much of what creativity helps us do in our creative brains, the way that we've trained our brains to operate, is to question what it is that we see in front of us. As are we just accepting everything that we see, or can we see all of the little things that it's made up of in order to be able to make some decisions about who we want to be and what we want to be next? And as far as igniting a creative spirit or keeping a creative spirit, sometimes I'm turning it back to people to say, how can you reimagine what it means to be who you are, what your life is, what your job is and why you have it, what the path is that you're on? The same way that you might look at a product and see 1,000 ways that it could be changed. How is your life similar? How could you look at your life in a similar way, or your workplace in a similar way, or the relationships that you have in a similar way, to bring that concept of designing back to your own life? I think the creative brain, the being able to have a little bit of bottom-up processing is just so useful for your own well-being and mental well-being. I know a lot of people say they'll criticize people like for not being able to see the forest for the trees. And I think in my work, a much more common problem is that people stop being able to see the trees as soon as you tell them it's a forest. And you just accept everything in front of you as just like, this is how it has to be. This is who I am. This is how I've identified. And it's like all of the questions that you could be asking about your life and about your work disappear under some kind of label or narrative that you've been handed about it. And I think it can be so good for well-being, not only at the individual level, but at our collective level, to be able to ask more questions, to get back to that curiosity phase of like, is everything that's here, is it the way that it has to be? Is this inevitable? Nothing is as it must be. I love James Baldwin said, the world is before you. and you need not take it or leave it as it was when you came in. And I feel like that's such a beautiful call to any of us as far as the work that we want to do in the world, but also for our own mental well-being and how we view ourselves, and even the kinds of like curiosities and creative practices that we might want to take up on a day-to-day basis.
You mentioned a project, I think it's called Project Uncaged, where you're working with incarcerated younger women, which sounds amazing. Maybe could you talk us through what that project's all about?
Yes, I was invited many years ago to be a writer in residence at a juvenile detention center, specifically for the girls there. I don't have a personal experience of having been in the justice system. I didn't know what that was going to be like. And so, I'm a total nerd, by the way. So, this was before I was in the field of public health. This is a big part of the reason why I wound up being in public health. But anyway, I spent the months leading up to that writers in residence program just digging into research about girls in the juvenile justice system. I was astonished by some of the things that I found out about gender inequities in the system, just things that I had never thought about before, that, the system was really designed for straight boys. And a lot of the programs and resources that are in, say, a juvenile detention facility are really designed with boys in mind. A lot of the policies around visitation are designed with boys in mind, the products and services that are there. And a lot of detention facilities at the time when I began this work didn't have any programs at all for girls. They would have several different things going on for the boys and literally nothing for the girls. So when I went into that detention center for the first time as a writer in residence, and it was for a creative writing program for girls, I knew that my work there was going to be not only to provide something immediate for the young women who had signed up to be in this program, how can we use creative writing to help you, have a safe space in the midst of this really chaotic and traumatizing experience that you're in here in this institution? How can we help you express yourself and maybe get to know one another? Yes, that was definitely something I was doing, but I also knew that my work was that plus how can this work that I'm doing with these girls be part of shifting the system and the structure and the institution and the policies that made their experience so inequitable that had led them to be here in the first place. And so anyway, I spent that first period of time in that program with them, with that other group that had brought me in, and just felt like, this was the best way that I've ever spent my time. I had to do this again. So I developed a program called Project Uncaged and began running it in various facilities around the Midwest and the United States. And again, with that goal of how can we create some space every day or once a week, depending on the program, a couple times a week, where girls can come and write and learn about writing and poetry and expressing themselves, but also use that as a time to teach them about civic engagement and how their ideas can be maybe funneled to some of the decision makers that have control over a lot of the experiences in their lives. So we publish books of their poetry and send them along with policy briefs to people like the mayor's office, city council members, state legislators, with a recognition that girls are the experts in their own lived experience. They know what they need. And if we can connect their own voices and their own words and their own expression with the leaders who are able to make decisions that could benefit these girls, then we can do a lot of good. So operating at these multiple levels of well-being, both that immediate care for the girls that are involved, and how can we also shift systems and institutions that could benefit them in the long term.
Curious if there were any policy changes through that, and also curious what you learned about the relationship between creativity and mental health through that experience.
Yeah, there's ongoing efforts to shift policies. We are seeing in the last several years also a greater commitment to ensuring gender equity for girls and, gender expansive youth. But some of the most immediate policy changes that we've seen have been around ensuring that girls have access to the things that they were asking for repeatedly, but just nobody was paying attention to. So sometimes that was we want a counselor to talk to. We want to be able to talk to them, at least once a week. That would be really helpful to us. Sometimes it was shifting policies related to visitors. Some institutions would have policies in place like you can't touch, if you're a visitor, you cannot touch the person that you're coming to visit. But how does that affect things when one of the people that's coming to visit is a baby and the mom is inside, right? Are you still going to say the policy is no touching? You clearly made that policy without mothers in mind, and there are mothers in these institutions. And then we saw some policy changes related to some girls would say, I feel like when I'm here and I can just write down what I'm thinking and feeling, I can do such a good job of articulating what's going on and why I'm here and what I need. But then when I'm in front of the judge, I can't think. I don't know what to say. There were some situations where they wouldn't let the girls read from a written page. They just had to stand and answer. And we got some people to shift their mindset around that. Why? Can they bring in some writing that can help them to be articulate and say what they want to say in a really high pressure moment? So some of the policy changes have been really localized and at the institutional level. And we are still waiting for some of the policy changes that would change girls' experience in general. Why there are more Black and brown girls in this system than white girls? Why have I never met a wealthy girl in any of my programs? We have over-policing in certain neighborhoods, and we have definitely levels of bias that are affecting incarceration rates. So we are still aiming for some of those policy changes that would really make a difference. I always say, Erin, that girls that I've met in Project Uncaged have been my greatest teachers. That is also true for any of the work that I do connecting creativity and mental health. They were some of my earliest teachers in that work as far as the mental health work of creative writing in a jail situation with young people who were traumatized and who were trying to work through it. And most of whom had no interest in poetry, and they would be very honest about that. Like, why are we doing this? A lot of my work with these girls came down to how do you just hold a space that's safe for somebody to use that time and that moment in that space however they would like to. Give them a few options. Do you want to just sit and rest? Do you want to chat? Do you want to write something? Do you want to doodle? As far as the very little power that I had in those scenarios, whatever I could bring in to give them some options and just see what happened. And what's really beautiful about creativity when it comes to really sensitive and difficult topics is that element of option. I give trainings in trauma-informed practice that are designed specifically for creatives and artists. And sometimes I say, if I had to reduce training in trauma-informed practice to like one word, and I hope nobody ever makes me do that, but if I had to do it, it would be choice. People have to have a choice, and we have to have some expanded options for how we share the human experience. And when it comes to Project Uncaged, I think what I saw was girls finally having a way to be who they were and demonstrate, not only am I whatever these adults in this scenario have decided that I am, and they've placed a label on me, and they've told me that I belong in this institution right now. Maybe that's some kind of slice of me. Maybe it's not at all. Maybe they've gotten it totally wrong. But if I'm given enough space and enough options to share my story on my terms, in my words, if you give me enough space and I feel safe to do it, I'm going to take that opportunity to share my story and re-narrate it. I've been handed a narrative, and do I want to keep that? Usually no. And if somebody can give me a chance, talking from the perspective of girls in the program, if somebody can give me a chance to say who I am on my terms and my words, I will take that chance. And what they say is always astonishing. It's sometimes unbearably vulnerable and incredibly moving. And it's a big reminder that for any of us, if we expect ourselves to always be able to communicate in this really straightforward fashion, like in conversation, we are going to hit our limits really fast. And that expectation that whatever I'm going through, I should be able to talk about it or just be really honest or frank or like upfront about it, or I should be able to put words to it. Those shoulds and those expectations are always adding to the existing suffering or anxiety that we're experiencing. And if we could give ourselves some leeway to be like, oh, hang on, I'm a human being and humans evolved to make and share art because we needed an expanded range of communication. That's at least one of the reasons why we evolved to do this, because there are things that we experience that we cannot smash into the kind of really limited range of like this normal conversational experience. And when we give ourselves some options, what if I could communicate using music, using metaphor, using color, using movement? If we give ourselves a chance to look at our lives differently and imagine sharing it in these other ways, we suddenly open up a lot of doors that allow us to be more honest about who we are, that allow us to share and disclose things that we might not otherwise. And in the case of the girls that I worked with in Project Uncaged, that allowed them to show the world that they are, 1,000 times more than what society tends to see them as.
We'll return to the conversation after this quick break. Support for Design Better comes from Uplift Desk, creators of office furniture designed to help you work better and live healthier. It's been estimated that the average person will spend 1/3 of their life at work. Sobering, huh? That's roughly 90,000 hours at work over your lifetime. Imagine what happens to your body if you're working with bad posture and poor circulation. It can be devastating on your health. That's why Eli and I love Uplift Desk and their ergonomic desks and chairs. Uplift Desk makes solid, well-constructed standing desks that you can customize to match your workspace. And they have a wide variety of incredibly ergonomic chairs. My personal favorite is the Human Scale Freedom Chair. I'm sitting in it right now. For professionals like us, investing in the right tools, especially our desk and chair, is essential. You're going to get free shipping, free returns with free return shipping, and an industry-leading 15-year warranty that covers the complete desk. Eli and I love their products, and we know that you will too. Give it a try. Go to upliftdesk.com and use code DesignBetter5 for 5% off your order. That's UPLIFT desk.com to get 5% off your entire order with promo code DesignBetter5. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. When we spoke with Seth Godin on Design Better, he said something very interesting. Everyone's got a noise in their head. You, me, your boss, everyone. That noise in our head is self-doubt, confusion, fear, anxiety, all of that. It's part of the human experience, and it can hold us back. Therapy is one of the best ways to work through it all, to quiet the unproductive noise and develop positive mental health. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online and designed to be convenient, flexible, and to work with your schedule. BetterHelp can help you get the support that you need. Visit betterhelp.com/designbetter today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/designbetter.
This episode is brought to you by Sax.com. At Sax.com, it's easy to find your new vibe. Dive into the Western trend with gold cowboy boots from Stott, or go full 90s throwback with platforms from Prada. You can shop for everything on your agenda, whether it's a breezy Zimmermann dress for a garden party or a bright Chloe blazer for brunch. Find inspiration for your new vibe every day at Sax.com.
And now, back to the show.
Tasha, I'm interested also in this another program that you work with or work on called Arts on Prescription. And for some context, both my parents are retired psychiatrists, and I think they even struggled a bit during their career with the sort of, this practice of a kind of medicine first, where if you have a problem, we're going to give you a pill to help fix it. Whereas I think even in their own experience, sometimes things like exercise could be much more effective in treating things like depression than maybe a Prozac or other SSRI type drug. And the drugs had their place, and I think they were helpful for the right kinds of people. But I'm just curious, what's been your experience with this particular program and how it maybe provides alternative modes of dealing with mental health issues?
Oh, thank you for asking about it. Yeah, we have been doing so much research and study into the concept of arts on prescription, which is sort of a subset of this model of care that's been practiced in other countries for a really long time at this point, called social prescribing, which is basically the idea that a physician or a therapist would be able to refer somebody not only to medication or like your traditional, maybe like specializations like physical therapy or something like that, but would also be able to refer you to things in your community that could help you address your needs. And that could be something for basic needs, like how can I get you some help with housing or with job skills training? How can I get you connected to a support group? But it can also be things like connecting with volunteer opportunities or gardening or, nature experiences, and also arts and culture. So that's the larger project of social prescribing. And in the US, we've seen growing interest in that, but especially the subset of it called Arts on Prescription, which is really looking at referring specifically out to arts and culture and nature experiences in your community. And this is super fascinating exactly for the reasons that you mentioned, Eli, which is that we kind of have this sense that as full human beings, we are whole people, and that the things that prevent us from feeling well or having access to well-being are really nuanced and complex. They're not just like, oh, it's not always reducible to a chemical imbalance. And I say this as somebody who has, for whom, Cymbalta kind of saved my life when I was in the midst of the worst of my depression, right? So I have nothing against medication when it's needed, but it's also recognizing that we are full human beings and we are affected by so much that's going on around us. And how can we get more honest about that and more practical about that when it comes to healthcare? So arts and prescription, we are seeing increasing pilots in the US. The biggest one so far has been Culture RX in Massachusetts, which was the first statewide model of arts and prescription. And they brought me in to evaluate that program a couple years ago. And we learned so much about that program across the state, how clinicians were using it. As an example, seeing therapists use it for patients who hadn't been leaving the house or didn't feel like they had a sense of meaning or purpose. And like, oh, if I suggest going to this museum, and not just going to the museum, but go to the museum and look specifically for artwork that resonates with you for A, B, and C things that we've been talking about, right? Kind of like a little assignment. And then talking through how that experience of leaving the house, going to that museum, seeing that artwork, exposing themselves to something different, kind of came back and improved the relationship with the therapist, improved the process of cognitive behavioral therapy. So, and that's just one example. And of course, we're seeing an epidemic of loneliness and isolation in the country with increasing understanding of the ramifications of that. I think the Surgeon General's report this spring compared being lonely can have negative health impacts that might be similar to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So it's really important that we figure out how to address loneliness. But physicians haven't had a way to do that. The best that they could do is maybe like recommend that you go make a friend, but there's nothing really actionable that they could do. So what we're seeing in early pilots in the US is that this adds so much to clinicians' toolkits that they are like, well, before I had nothing to say or offer here. Now I can say, well, what if you go to this place that has group music classes and then you meet these people that are like, this is something that you're interested in. You meet these other people who are also interested in that. You'll be able to form some relationships. So it's not yet something that we're looking at as a replacement for treatment as usual, or like, oh, I would have used to prescribe something to you, but now I'm just going to send you to a dance class. There are studies of people looking into how the arts could replace some treatment as usual and some therapies. That's not pie in the sky or like weird, but that's not yet what we're doing with this particular model of care. It's more like, what are the tools that we haven't yet had? And what I love about this, and what I think that your listeners will love so much, is that it really attaches us, or puts us in better touch with the actual definition of health. You know, back in the 40s, in 1940s, the WHO defined health as complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. And so that tells us that there's kind of two halves of health. It's like the absence of disease part and the presence, I would say, of well-being. And even if you get your phone out and you like type in for an emoji that's related to health, all of the emojis will represent that absence of disease part, like what happens when you're not well. You go to a hospital, you go to a doctor, like a stethoscope, whatever. It's sort of like that medical response to when you are sick, when you are suffering, when you are injured, as opposed to zooming way back out and saying like, what would it actually mean to ensure that everyone had complete, that's a really high bar, complete physical, mental, and social well-being? That kind of work requires us to build a whole different kind of community, a whole different system. This is where we need creatives and designers to be engaged in the process of health. It's not just, redesigning healthcare and the systems that we have, but zooming way out and being like, what kind of world and community would we have to imagine? What would have to exist for humans to actually be able to access that level of well-being? What kind of community do we have to have that would be most conducive to humans being able to thrive? We don't have that yet. We don't even have an imagination around that yet. But arts on prescription gets us a little bit closer because it at least acknowledges that there's this other part of well-being that we haven't been talking about or treating yet. And it makes us connect more with various parts of our communities that really represent components of human thriving, which often have to do with arts and culture and, connections with nature and green space.
This is super interesting because when I think about creativity and at the core of what it has to offer, there's this spark of curiosity and mental engagement. I remember, I studied painting and drawing, and waking up in the morning, and that first moment I would wake up and remember, oh, I made this painting last night and I was really excited about it. I can't wait to see it and reconnect with it. Just like, is it as good as I thought it was? And behind that is I'm making this thing that I'm excited about. And it's so exciting because it's an opportunity for me to share with other people and connect. And that is really what creativity it promises. It promises human connection. And then if we step back from that and look at blue zones, the Harvard longevity study, there's a book that came out this year about longevity, and the quick Cliff Notes take on it is social contact. It's like community and social engagement is what leads to long life. Because when we have connection with others, we have a purpose, we have a mental stimulation. It leads to more likely physical engagement as well. It's like unlocks all of these things. It's a super activity. So creativity as not just mental well-being, but also physical well-being, it seems like you can't separate the two. Creativity is inherently good for us.
Yes, that's so much of what we've been talking about. Thank you so much for sharing that, Erin. 'Cause there's also, if you all are interested, there are some fascinating longitudinal studies coming out from my colleague Daisy Fancourt at the University College London, looking at engagement in the arts and correlations between arts engagement and longevity as well. And we could chat all day about why that might be, like what are the hypotheses around that. But a big part of it is recognizing that distinction between living a life of where you're just asking like, okay, am I not in pain? Am I not sick? Am I not suffering? And a life in which you actually have something that makes you want to be here and show up as a human being. And I say that with all of the gravity that comes with that as somebody who once didn't know why I was here and if I wanted to be here, right? Like well-being has to be associated with having something that makes you want to be here. And that can be really different for so many different people. But creativity is part of the process by which we find that thing that makes us want to be here, the exploration process, the inquisitivity that leads us to find what it is for us. And then for so many of us, creativity is part of what that thing is, like the part of what makes us, like you said, like wake up in the morning and be excited to discover, what's next? What have we been creating and what's next?
What are some, and these can be, quick tips or we can go into more depth, but are there any practices that we as creatives can instill that help support our mental health? And one that comes to mind that I've just got back into recently, and I know Erin is into, is this idea of meditation and mindfulness, which I think has been helpful for both of us. You talk more about that, or are there other practices that you could see creatives especially benefiting from?
Well, I did already say, don't be afraid to experiment with other parts of your creativity. Something that isn't related to your ability to make a living or something that's less related to your own ambition, whatever that might look like, something that you're less likely to feel incredibly perfectionistic about. If you can find a practice like that you can dive into as a creative that's, again, not attached to all of those things, that can be really great for your mental health. In a similar way to finding flow or practices of meditation or mindfulness, sometimes you can get into a flow with creativity when it's not attached to something else, when it's not attached to some carrot that you feel driven to get, or the perfectionist bully behind you that's beating you to move forward and get better and better. So finding a practice like that can be really beautiful. And then also, so much of what comes up in my trainings in mental health is like, how can we give ourselves some space to be much more fully human? And recognizing these creative practices and being in nature or spending time with other people, recognizing these things as fundamental to our ability to survive, that these are not nice to haves, these are not indulgences, but these are things that we've evolved to do because we need to do them. And that can be related to the arts, but it can also be things like rest. Tricia Hersey's nap ministry is so fascinating for how she's been elevating the value of rest and the importance of it, and that it's not outside of our work collectively to make the world a better place, but it's an essential part of it. And your relationships with other people. I think a lot of times as creatives, we can get caught up in the kind of larger sociocultural narrative around what makes a human being worthwhile. Well, it's like your productivity, it's your achievements, and achievements narrated and defined by somebody outside of us, right? When we're not, quote unquote, producing, or in Tricia Hersey's words, like when we're not useful to capitalism, we think that there's no reason for us to be here. We don't know who we are anymore. And I think it can be a really beautiful and mentally healthy creative process to push back on that and to think, no, what does it mean to be human? And what does a human being need in order to thrive? Sometimes when I'm talking with students, I ask them to imagine, like, if you wanted to adopt a dog and you went to the local pound and you saw a really rambunctious husky there, and you're like, okay, I'm going to take this dog home. But you live in a studio apartment and you're never home and you hate going on walks. Like, in a couple weeks, that dog is going to be miserable. And it won't be because the dog needs medicine. And it won't be because the dog has some kind of like specific problem, other than that it is living in an environment that is not conducive to its ability to thrive. And I think as a daily creative practice, even putting the question back to people, like, what is it that humans need in order to thrive? For any of us, what do you, any individual listener right now, what do you need in order to thrive? And how can we put some value and importance back on that, even when whatever that thing is that helps you thrive isn't immediately useful to capitalism? And how can we be part of revaluing that as a collective and as a society as well? That's such a fundamental and crucial creative question.
Yeah. Catherine May's book, Wintering, I think has a lot of alignment with what you're describing. So speaking of inspiring reads, curious what you're reading, watching, listening to, Tasha, that puts energy in your battery.
Oh, gosh. Well, I did just mention Tricia Hersey. I pulled out her manifesto that came out a couple of years ago called Rest is Resistance. I mentioned my own experience with burnout. I feel like I'm walking on the razor's edge of it all the time. And just whatever I can gravitate towards that helps me acknowledge that and keep an eye on it is really helpful. And she does it in such a creative way. She's herself a performance artist, and her ideas about rest are just not what you expect. And it's just endlessly refreshing. So can't recommend that highly enough. And then also anything by James Baldwin. I try to read his full collected essays every year. So if you're looking for a read, The Fire Next Time can't be beat.
Yeah, I keep rereading that over and over again. It's so good. Where can people learn more about you and your work?
Oh, thank you. You can find information about me as well as any publications that I have related to the effects of art on your health and well-being at tashagolden.com. And if you're interested specifically in arts on prescription, there is a free field guide to how to do this in your own communities, even if it's just starting with one person and connecting with one person in healthcare and one cultural organization in your community. You can do this work, and people are doing it. We are seeing it all over the US and all around the world pop up. So you can find that free resource at tashagolden.com/field guide. And would love to hear from any of y'all creatives, the work that you're doing and how it's affecting your own well-being and the well-being of the people around you.
Awesome. Well, Tasha Golden, thank you so much for joining us on the show.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's been really lovely to talk with you all.
Have you seen the new MacBook Air? Oh man, they are so fast, they're super light, and they are beautiful. And we're giving one away to a lucky winner. To enter to win the new MacBook Air, all you have to do is complete our listener survey. Tell us a bit about you and share your feedback about the show. It'll help us improve, and you could soon be enjoying a brand new MacBook Air. To take the survey, visit dbtr.co/2024survey. That's dbtr.co/2024survey, and you'll automatically be entered to win. We'll randomly select a winner on Friday, March 1st, so be sure to complete the survey by then.
This episode was produced by Eli Woolery and me, Aaron Walter, with engineering and production support from Brian Paik of Pacific Audio. If you found this episode useful, we hope that you'll leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to finer shows. Or simply drop a link to the show in your team's Slack channel, designbetterpodcast.com. It'll really help others discover the show. Until next time.